So we're ready to go. So again, thank you all for joining. If it's anyone's first time joining anything relating to Zioness, we're so excited to have you, and this is a great one to start with. Zioness is a national progressive activist organization, a grassroots activist organization. We have 35 chapters around the country. We are committed to domestic social justice work, to the advancement of social justice, racial justice, economic and gender justice in America. We are also proudly Zionist, and we refuse to check our Zionism or our support for Israel at the door. We know that the vast majority of Jews are deeply committed to Israel's security because Zionism is an intrinsic part of our Jewish identity. And we believe not only that the Jewish people should find liberation and sovereignty and self-determination, but that all people should find liberation and civil rights and equality. And that's why we're so committed to doing this domestic social justice work. So it is truly such an extraordinary privilege for me to be here with Dr. Einat Wilf, who has inspired me long before Zioness existed. She was speaking in a way that no one else was, and she was speaking directly to my values and to really what felt otherwise like a void in the Jewish landscape. And so to have learned so much from her writing before I had the opportunity to actually meet her and know her really is what in many ways inspired me to begin an organization that is speaking, a very similar message and talking about the very consistent and really intertwined relationship between my progressive and feminist identity and my Jewish and Zionist identity. I know many of you know a lot about Dr. Wilf, or maybe have heard her speak before, but this is just such a special privilege. So I just want to do a little bit of a bio of her. Her bio is long, so bear with me, but she's a real superstar. She is the co-author of The War of Return, How Western Indulgence of the Palestinian Dream Has Obstructed the Path to Peace, which is recently out. We're going to talk about it a little bit later. And she is a leading intellectual and original thinker on matters of foreign policy, economics, education, Israel, and Zionism. She was a member of the Israeli parliament, the Knesset, from 2010 to 2013, where she served as chair of the Education Committee and member of the influential Foreign Affairs and Defense Committee. She is considered one of Israel's most articulate representatives on the international stage, and I second that. In the past, Dr. Wilf served as a senior fellow at the Jewish People Policy Institute, the Bave Foundation Adjunct Fellow at the Washington Institute for Near East Policy, Foreign Policy Advisor to Vice Prime Minister Shimon Peres, and a strategic consultant with McKinsey & Company. Dr. Wilf has a BA from Harvard, an MBA from INSEAD in France, and a PhD in political science from the University of Cambridge. So she's really slacked on education. Born and raised in Israel, Dr. Wilf served as an intelligence officer in the IDF, and she is the author of 6 books that explore key issues in Israeli society. Thank you so much for being with us. So to start, I'm going to start with the obvious. You started what I think is a truly revolutionary conversation on the relationship between feminism and Zionism. And while I never personally questioned my commitment to both movements, and I always rejected the suggestion that comes up, as you know, in some progressive spaces, which of course we'll get to, where people say one cannot hold both values, being a progressive and a feminist and also a Zionist at the same time, I also never necessarily saw a direct connection between the two until you wrote about it. So I was hoping you could talk a bit about your thesis that both movements are what you call daughters of the Enlightenment.
So first, thank you for having me. It's truly an honor, and I am in awe of what you do and really bringing the voice of being Zionists and progressives on campus. It is truly important. So a bit about Zionism and feminism. Those are obviously two identities that define who I am. Zionism, certainly. I mean, I grew up in Israel. Growing up in Israel, by and large, for most Israelis, means that you're an instinctive Zionist, a natural Zionist. You don't think much about it. But I was aware enough of Zionism to realize that it made my life possible. That is a revolutionary idea about the self-determination of the Jewish people. It made my life as a proud Jew who can walk with her head held up high anywhere on earth, and that Zionism was what made that possible. My feminism really took a bit of time to come into being as a very strong and aware identity. I think I was an instinctive feminist in the sense that from a very young age, I was very confident and ambitious, and I had no sense that, I should face any barriers in life. But really kind of thinking about feminism only happened when I got to college, which I think for many people is an experience of peering a bit behind the scenes and kind of learning a bit how we got to where we are. And I realized that as a feminist, I owe a huge debt of gratitude to those who have fought before me. And part of the way that I express my gratitude today is to be vocally a feminist and to brand myself a feminist. There is something about titles that sometimes people kind of shy away from. Oh, Zionist, that's a loaded word. That's a strong word. Say that you're pro-Israel, or say that you support, Jewish self-determination. That's softer. But it's exactly the idea of being soft that I oppose. Sure, we understand the importance of equality of men and women, but why do you go around saying that you're a feminist? That's a bit harsh. But exactly the idea that it's harsh is the one that began to catch my ear at one point. That I realized, okay, there are two revolutions without which I could literally be doing none of the things I'm doing. Could not be in my own state, could not get education as a woman, control my life, decide whom I marry. And then I began to realize that merely saying that I'm a Zionist or a feminist, depends on the different circles and contexts, was something that grated on people. They started to scratch when you kind of said I'm a feminist or I'm a Zionist. And I began to wonder why. I mean, seriously, as far as I was concerned, two unadulterated goods, good movements that have brought about, as far as I'm concerned, only good things to my life. Why were the words being considered problematic? And the more I thought about it, the more I realized that the revolution of Zionism and the revolution of feminism are essentially the same. They have the same trajectories. They follow the same path. They are both daughters of the Enlightenment in the sense that they are both products of the modern idea of the equality of human beings, both as individuals and collectives. They both come from the idea that Jews as a people have the universal right to be masters of their political fate, to organize themselves politically, to decide who they are, what they are, to live in a state where they can defend themselves. This is a modern idea. And feminism is certainly a daughter of the modern idea of the equality of human beings. And both Jews and women, for a very, very long time, were subjected to ideologies and to cultures which saw them as being lower on the social rung. I mean, for women, we're pretty much talking about globally, and for 10,000 years, at least since the dawn of the agricultural era, women lived in civilizations and societies where their inferiority, where their status as basically as property was part of the culture and society. And what does it mean to say it's part of culture and society? It means that it's woven into everything. The poems people hear as children, the stories, the images they see, the idioms, the way they are raised, the hopes they have, it's in the air they breathe. And for Jews, it was not global. It was for about half of humanity, mostly under Christianity and Islam, for about as long as Christianity and Islam exist, so at most 2 centuries, where Jews were accorded in Islamic and Christian society an inferior and often very precarious and persecuted status that came out of the notion that having failed to accept the New Testament or the final prophecy of the Quran, they cannot be accepted as equals in the societies in where they live. And under those two civilizations, again, it was woven into the fabric of those civilizations that Jews are not equal. And in many ways, that Jews were destined to the dustbin of history. And Zionism is about the Jews coming back into history. Jews basically saying, we're no longer going to take this idea that you, the others, are telling us where our proper role in society is. And this is what feminism is. This is women rising up to say, hey, we're no longer accepting that you are telling us what our limitations are, what our role in society is, what our ambitions should be. And Zionism and feminism are born and develop intellectually throughout the 19th century and really make their greatest massive revolutionary gains in the 20th century, each in its own way. Feminism, of course, with education and the right to vote, and really expanding the sphere of what women can aspire to. And Zionism, in its own way, really revolutionizes the life of Jews by saying, you know what, we're no longer relying on other people to decide what our fate is going to be. We are going to choose our own fate. This is the idea of self-determination. We will determine ourselves, our future. And feminism and Zionism make revolutionary gains throughout the 20th century, really changing the life of tens of millions, hundreds of millions, and certainly with women coming to billions, even though certainly not all of them yet. But the story doesn't end there. What really struck me is for both women and Jews, for Zionists and feminists, the struggle continues, because both Zionists and feminists, they dared challenge power structures that existed for millennia. Now, I was also a politician for a while, and I joke that for my short career in politics, I've learned one lesson, which I think is the only relevant lesson of politics, which is that power is never voluntarily given. Power is something you have to take, and once you've taken, you have to defend, because there will be a constant effort to take it away from you. And when you have societies that were predicated on hierarchy between Jews and non-Jews, between women and men for millennia, it means that there's an entire power structure that sustains this hierarchy. And when you challenge this power structure, there's going to be backlash. There's a great phrase that I found running on the internet, and I tried to find who said it, and it's not clear that one person said it, but some people said close things. It basically says, to those accustomed to privilege, equality feels a whole lot like discrimination. And for me, that's the entire story. When you challenge a power structure and you move from this, from a hierarchy that existed for millennia like this, and you say, hello, you know, we're your equals. We're going to look you in the eye as equals. Those who are here do not say, sure, come on board. So excited to finally have you look us in the eye as equals. They see this and they're saying, oh, whoa, something's wrong. I mean, you know, this, go back here. That's the proper society. That's the proper social structure. And both Zionism and feminism are experiencing backlash. Every gain, every progress they make, they have to fight with backlash, trying to put Jews back where they belong and women back where they belong. And here is where I circle back to insisting on the label of a feminist and a Zionist, because one of the most insidious ways that the effort to put women and Jews back in their place operates is by creating this social difference, this intellectual difference between the good Jew and the bad Zionist, the good woman and the bad feminist. And the only thing that differentiates the good Jew and the bad Zionist is power and their attitude to power. And that is the only thing that differentiates the good woman and the bad feminist. The feminist, the Zionist, is the person who says, I'm unabashed about having power, about wanting power, about defending my right to power. And this is why it grates on people, because when you say you're a feminist, you're showing that you're not going to cow to those who are trying to pressure you to be the good kind of Jew, the good kind of woman. It means that you're not the person who will succumb to that pressure, and that's a problem. So that goes back. This is where I circle back. After having gone through this intellectual process and research, I've become even more staunch in why it's important to be a vocal and outward feminist and a vocal Zionist.
You're so amazing. I like want to cry listening to you speak. I'm not even kidding. And I obviously agree wholeheartedly, and I'm so inspired by the way that you articulate this. And it's, you know, we're on the same page. That's why we call this organization Zioness, because we cannot be afraid to claim our Zionism, to reclaim what Zionism means for the Jewish people, to be able to express what Zionism means to us and not let anyone else pervert the term or work to destroy the term until we're using it and expressing what it actually means and how inherent it is to our Jewish identities. Other people won't understand it. We can't expect them to. So this goes straight to my next question. Some watching may have heard or maybe haven't heard a particular unnamed but prominent political strategist and pollster who speaks to Jewish communities around the world and has for quite a long time said that we have to, you know, retire the word Zionism because it doesn't poll well. And that we can't, you know, continue using it because whenever we call ourselves Zionists, we're automatically losing in kind of the court of public opinion. Obviously, you and I both fundamentally disagree with that. But even while others may not go quite as far as this person, there is a pretty common conversation in the community about whether it's actually too late to reclaim the term Zionism and whether we should continue using it. So your, passion on this topic, which obviously is so consistent with our mission and so inspiring for me, I want everyone to hear it. And I just hope that you could reflect a little bit on that conversation.
So I can name him because I wrote about it. His name is Frank Luntz, and I don't remember how many years ago I wrote about it when it came out. The first time I heard it, I was shocked. I think there was something deeply un-Zionist about saying that Zionism doesn't poll well. I was like, seriously?
He's a Zionist, for the record. He is
I know he is. I know he is.
For people who are watching.
No, I know he is. Precisely because he is, but he's also a pollster. And I think in this sense, his pollster identity became more powerful than his Zionist identity, because pollsters by definition are people who kind of say, okay, what do people think? Does it poll well? Does it poll well? Well, let's say what people feel comfortable with. People like me who are thinkers, who are writers, who are even a certain kind of politician, we're like, so what if this is what people think? I mean, so what? Our role is to change what people think. Our role is to change how people feel. I mean, feminism, there's this phrase about, what was it? Shy women or polite women don't make history, or, And polling Zionism would have not built us a state, because Zionism did not poll well among Jews in the early 20th century. Jews preferred to reject Zionism, many of them, to be French or German, or to immigrate to America, or to be communists. It was a tiny, tiny minority that was Zionist. So I think when I heard that, my whole being rebelled. I was like, absolutely not. And I had to write this column that I wrote for the Jerusalem Post, which said, we are not ceding this territory, because it's not it's not by accident that Zionism doesn't poll well. It's not that you're saying, okay, people, do you like green or blue? So we'll go with green. You know, it's like this neutral choice. No, Zionism is not polling well because there has been a deliberate, decades-long effort to toxify Zionism, to make sure that Zionism is a word, is an adjective that people feel uncomfortable with. Again, the same with feminism. There is an ongoing effort to make sure that women don't feel comfortable with feminism, because how are you going to stop a revolution? To stop a revolution, you need to drive a wedge between the revolutionaries and the ideas. You need to make sure that the revolution will run out of fuel. How do you do that? You drive a wedge so that people will say, you know what, I don't feel comfortable. Look at these feminists. They know. And you want Jews to look at Zionism and say, I'm not going to sign up to anything that has Zion in its name. So this is how you stop a revolution in its tracks. And Zionism, some people tell me, oh, Zionism became toxic because Israel did terrible things. Okay, that's like one worldview. Israel is terrible, oppressive, colonialist. So Zionism got a bad name because it should have gotten a bad name because Israel does terrible things. Now, my answer was, look, this fails the logic test. If Zionism, if the problem was what Israel did, then the Israel or pro-Israel would have polled worse than Zionism, because Zionism would have retained its pristine ideological kind of sheen, okay? People would have said, no, Zionism was a beautiful idea, but Israel ruined it. And being pro-Israel would have polled worse than being a Zionist. But you all know, and Frank knows, that pro-Israel polls better than Zionism. So it fails the logic test. So, and the reason is because Zionism has been the target of the deliberate campaign to make the adjective toxic. And the reason is that I believe those who are engaged in this campaign, I think they understand Zionism better than many people. I have a talk that I sometimes speak about Israel and what makes Israel what it is. And I argue that the source of Israel's strength, the secret sauce, our superpower, it's not the military. You see tanks and airplanes and say, no, that's not it. It's not even the economy and the fact that it's relatively, before Corona, doing well. And it's not even the people. My argument to what makes Israel tick, what makes Israel strong, is Zionism, is the idea. The idea of Zionism was so powerful that under its inspiration, people did great acts. They moved across continents. They made the desert bloom. They built a country. They sacrificed their lives for the idea that Jews will be masters of their fate. Now, if you want to destroy the state of Israel, and this is the ultimate purpose of those who are trying to toxify Zionism, then you don't mess around with outward issues. You go directly to the superpower. The kryptonite that goes to the superpower. And the superpower is Zionism. So you need to make Zionism something that no one will want to touch. And I genuinely believe that just as the construction of the state of Israel followed the inspiration of Zionism, I believe that the destruction of the state of Israel can follow the destruction of Zionism. If you make Zionism something that no one wants to identify with, then no one will sacrifice their lives for that, which means that no tank and no airplane will ever move. No one will build an economy. I mean, everything falls if people no longer believe in the idea. And because it's not a coincidence that Zionism became a bad word, we can't cede that intellectual territory. Because when we see that, the push to put us back in our place, to be the good kind of Jews, the Jews who reject power, the Jews who say, look, it was good before, we were moral, we were good. This is never going to stop until we're back in our proper place, which is why we have to stop it, and we can't go back, because this is not innocent.
It's every word resonates so deeply with me. And I love that you talked about this, the distinction between Zionism and Israel and the politics and policies of Israel, because we talk about that at Zionist all the time. Inevitably, somebody wants us to talk about Israeli policy, to criticize Israeli policy, to prove our progressive credibility by how willing we are to bash Israel and, to talk about settlements and the conflict. And we are constantly explaining to people, and I agree with you, the people who are, responsible for this campaign to demonize Zionism and Zionists, they know what they're doing. But I think a lot of the people who are following them really don't. So there's so many people who are just in these movements and hear, anti-Zionism as part of the menu of progressive issues, and they don't know enough to push back on that at all, or to understand what Zionism really is or what it means to Jewish people. And if we're not there owning that conversation, then someone else will. But when we're there, and when, everywhere I go and everywhere I speak, and I'm sure you get this all the time, I'm sure you get it even more than I do, people want to know what Zionist's position is on settlements, for example. And I always say Zionist does not organizationally take positions on Israeli policy. Zionism is not about the contemporary politics of the state of Israel. It's about the existence of a safe and secure state of Jewish sovereignty and emancipation. And what happens in the state, like all states, for example, the country that I live in now, where I'm horrified by the politics and policies of the government, doesn't mean that I in any way reject the legitimacy of the United States of America as a member of the community of nations. And it's so important for people to realize that also about Israel. I could not agree more that this campaign has at its root and its beating heart is anti-Zionism. And I say it in quotes, and we'll come back to it. Anti-Zionism is not a thing. It's not a real, position. It is the destruction of Jewish liberation. It is the denial of Jewish civil rights. So I can't take it seriously. It's not a movement. People claim that it's a movement for Palestinian rights, and they try to create this binary where if you support Israel, you automatically don't support Palestinians. And you are a living, breathing example as an Israeli former government official of how many Zionists deeply care about Palestinian human rights. And this binary has to be rejected. Zionism is not about Israeli politics and policy any more than it's about Palestinian politics and policy, any more than it's about the conflict. So I think it's so important that we draw the lines, in an appropriate way. And you've been doing that, so effectively and with such clarity. And I'm so grateful for your leadership on that. So tell us a little bit about the placard strategy that you refer to in your writings. Who employs this strategy, and what do you think is the genesis of it?
So I talked about, first of all, every word. And again, the fact that you're fighting for the right of Jews and women to speak clearly about the right to self-determination. I mean, that's it. That's exactly where the battle lines are drawn. So I spoke about the fact that the campaign to turn Zionism into a toxic word is not innocent. And the means by which this campaign has been waged for decades is something that I've come to name as the placard strategy. The reason is that it's very visual and everyone immediately recognizes it. We've all seen placards in anti-Israel demonstrations, and the placards follow this very simple graphic. It's an equation. And on one side of the equation, it says Israel, Zionism. Sometimes they just draw the Star of David, and then there's an equal sign. And on the other side of this equation is a list of words. And the campaign to make Zionism a toxic word has been so effective that even lovers of Israel, Zionists, know what's on the other side of the equation. And it's apartheid and colonialism and racism and imperialism and Nazism and genocide. And those who wage this campaign, this placard campaign, they will tell you, these equations are truth. Zionism is racism. I mean, the Zionism is racism placard campaign was waged in the United Nations and movements. It's not just on placards. It's an all-encompassing campaign to establish this idea in people's mind. They will say, yeah, I mean, the right of self-determination of the Jewish people is a racist idea. Somehow the right of the Slovaks to self-determination is never considered a racist idea, but for the Jews it is. So it's always presented as truth. Of course it's imperialism. Of course it's colonialism. Of course it's Nazism. Nazism is a benign word. What the Zionists are doing is worse than what the Nazis are doing. So they presented as if like this innocent description of reality. And I'm sure even as I'm saying this, the campaign has been so effective that I'm sure even some of you are listening and saying, intellectually, she sounds that she's saying it's right, but we still feel uncomfortable. That Zionism may be a little bit racist or imperialist. I mean, this is how effective this campaign has been. And again, it works like a bit of a refrain in a song. I mean, so all these words are chosen. They're presented as if they reflect the truth. But you only need to visit Israel literally one day to realize there's no connection. So then why are these words chosen? And these words are chosen because they're chosen to be the words that at every single moment reflect what society thinks of as evil. So for example, when imperialism and the battle against imperialism was big, then Zionism as imperialism was a big word. Now you see it less. Now you see more racism, apartheid. So, but the idea is always the same. Equate Zionism with evil. And then the placard strategy works by repetition, a refrain, so that people are constantly exposed to Zionism, Israel, the Star of David equals evil. And it's a refrain. Zionism, Israel, Star of David equals evil. And then ultimately we begin to say, look, where there's smoke, there's fire. And you begin to believe these things, especially for people, like you said, who do not spend their lives thinking about it. And now when you set up an intellectual atmosphere that says there's an evil out there, well, what do you do with evil? Do you negotiate a peace agreement with evil? No, you don't do that. With evil, you eradicate evil. So the reason I've started speaking about the placard strategy is that ultimately human beings, except, for a few psychopaths who are very small in numbers, they don't commit acts of extreme cruelty and mass violence without their minds being prepared to believe that what they're about to do is good. Quite a few years ago, I think there was a rapper who got a lot of flack for saying that even Hitler believed that what he was doing was good. And I listened to what he said, and I thought that's actually a very, very true insight. So people who commit acts of mass murder believe it's for the good. And there's no greater good than the eradication of evil, by definition. So if you begin to create an intellectual atmosphere that says there's an evil out there, you are preparing the ground for mass violence to eradicate this evil, which is why I take all of this very seriously. It's not just about like saying this or saying that. And if I go back again to the feminism and Zionism corollary, when The Handmaid's Tale came out as a TV series, and it's really, I'm sure all of you watched it, it's really wrenching to watch. And Margaret Atwood said, you know, there's nothing in this series that has not happened or that is not happening to women somewhere. And the dread with which I watched it, the dread that basically says all your gains could be rolled back. Don't think that you can just rest on your feminist laurels and enjoy the status of women. This is, again, you cannot cede this intellectual territory because there's constantly pressure to roll it back. So the same with Zionism. I see it's the same dread when I see the rise of anti-Zionism. It's the same dread that I feel when I see The Handmaid's Tale. It's the notion that all the gains that have made my freedom possible could be rolled back. And that's why I fight for it. It's not just some like small, marginal, intellectual hobby.
Yeah, we've been talking about this a lot. We've done a bunch of webinars now. We did one with Helene Krasnoff, who's the vice president for public policy and law at Planned Parenthood. And she's, you know, the chief litigator for Planned Parenthood nationally. And, you know, she talked to us about the composition of the Supreme Court and the future of Roe versus Wade and, you know, how precarious the situation is. And for people like me who grew up in a world where, you know, women's reproductive access was a given, it's shocking. But for people my mom's age, it's not shocking at all because they lived through the fight the first time and they knew that that fight was not over. It's never going to be over, I think, for Zionism or feminism. And I think, you know, your vigilance is both warranted and incredibly inspiring. So you wrote, there's a passage that you wrote that I love. You wrote, I forgot which article I was in, but you wrote, feminism has been painted as an affront to womanhood, an ideology of hatred toward men, and as the main barrier to a nice woman finding a man. Though why a man who doesn't view a woman as his equal is worth marrying at all should be the real question. So first of all, I love that, obviously, as a proud feminist. But it's also really interesting because we get questions all the time about the name Zioness. And we launched, you know, I think, as you know, out of a response to the anti-Semitism in the women's movement. And we had no idea how big this was going to become. So, you know, the word Zioness, you know, like the lioness and obviously the Zion part, critically important. And the name is so powerful and so resonant for people, but we do get questions all the time about whether we're a feminist organization. And it's because older men who have been alienated by various iterations of the feminist movement, as you wrote, people believe it to be an ideology of hatred toward men, feminism. Older men want to know whether they're welcome in Zioness and whether they can, you know, participate for all of the progressive activism that we do for racial justice and marriage equality and, you know, climate change, gun control, immigrants and refugees, things that have nothing to do with women. But of course, we need men to support women's rights as well. I mean, it's a simple numbers game. We're not going to win, you know, women's equality without men on board. So it's fascinating, though, because older men feel like they need to ask whether they're welcome. And for any men who are watching, you are not only welcome, we would love to get you involved. Please reach out. We need you 100%. But for younger men, for millennial and whatever the generation is after millennial, like Z, I don't know, Generation Z, I think, they are horrified by the suggestion that they wouldn't be feminists and that Zionists wouldn't be representative for them. So I'm just curious if you've seen anything or, you know, noticed anything about how, you know, Zionism obviously is still a difficult term for a lot of people, but maybe feminism is having like a positive rebirth in sort of millennial and younger activist spaces.
Yes, that is certainly something that I noticed, which is great and exciting. And I do think that it's the outcome of a lot of women, I think, really somewhere in the last decade or so, maybe a little earlier, started speaking clearly about their feminism and making it cool again and speaking about how it's a debt of gratitude. So I think that had a lot of impact. With Zionism, of course, we're in smaller numbers, so I think it takes longer to have the impact. But even with Zionism, your very existence, the existence of Zionists, the existence of the women and the men of Zionists also shows that I think we've been able to change the trend that most people or a lot of people have not been willing to accept the idea that it's too late to reclaim Zionism and that we should let it go. So I think maybe we're trailing a bit with Zionism, but I think I'm seeing some positive signs. When I started talking about it, it was more clear. And then I remember at one point my audience became uneven because they didn't understand what I said about feminism being a toxic word. It was no longer the case for them. And I saw it when I started meeting younger audiences. But Zionism was still. So I think it's a bit trailing, but definitely when I started writing about it a few years ago, about how we shouldn't cede the intellectual territory on Zionism and where we are today. And I have a very sensitive ear for that. I follow and have seen actually only a rise in young people and others reclaiming their Zionism, speaking positively about it, refusing to cede that intellectual territory. So what we might be trailing behind, but on the whole, I think we are building a group of people who are not willing to kind of pay that idea that they should not claim that adjective.
Making some progress. A quick thing that I wanted to say before, and I forgot, when we were talking about the placard strategy, and you were talking about this list of, items in anti-Zion, or Zionism is listed in some of these anti-Zionists, and I always do in quotes. I hope other people will do the same. Spaces where there's a list: genocide, apartheid, colonialism, oppression, all of these terms. And there actually was a t-shirt, if anyone is involved with Netroots Nation, which is a huge progressive conference every year. And last year it was in Philadelphia, and there was actually a t-shirt that had this list of items just in block print, and Zionism was on there. And these are progressive activists. They're people who are committed to social justice. They're good people who don't know, aren't able to distinguish between these terms because exactly the way you described it, because of the placard strategy. And we can, I think, disentangle it if we show up proudly as Zionists, because it's a situation where it's a game of association and perception. It doesn't go deeper than that, because the people who aren't following these issues, most people don't know what Zionism is. And, they hear it as part of this list of terrible things. And so that's the association that they have in their heads. But when they see that, the vast majority of Jews are progressive and are also Zionists, and that Zionism is totally consistent with our progressive values and our identities, there will be a perception shift. And it's why I so fundamentally disagree with Frank Luntz and anyone else who says we can't use the term Zionism. I think we absolutely must. It's the only way that we can actually, fight this fight effectively. And frankly, it's, as you said, it's serious. It's much bigger than the term. It's actually about Jewish liberation. We can't take it for granted. And you talk about this in a different article where you talk about the fact that, like I just said, that I, as a woman who grew up after Roe and in a world where there was never a question that if I needed access to reproductive health, it would be very easy for me to get it. That, the same thing for a lot of young Jews who never knew a world where a powerful Jewish state that could defend itself and defend Jews around the world existed. We forget the fact of Jewish vulnerability and Jewish victimhood for millennia. So, it feels sometimes like it's very easy for us to take it for granted. It's very easy for us to conflate terms and be afraid of terms because we want to fit in and all that stuff. But if we own Zionism positively and proudly, we'll be able to fit in as proud Zionists. We'll be protecting ourselves while we're doing the justice work that we care about for everyone else. So I just wanted to go back to that really quickly. So I have a question that's kind of two parts. Something that you wrote, I'm going to quote you: rather than wait for God or Messiah, this is about Zionism, rather than wait for God or Messiah to bring about their salvation, Zionism called upon the Jewish people to be the vehicles of their own redemption. Zionism demonstrated that even when dealt some of the worst cards in history, humans were active agents capable of changing the course of their private and collective futures. It's so powerful. And so two distinct questions here. The first is how you describe Zionism as an intersectional movement. I think for a lot of people watching who, are intersectionalists, who really believe that we should be, combining forces and lifting the voices of the most marginalized among us. Just would love your reflections on that. And then the second is that reading this quote makes me think of your very public atheism. And so I think it seems like there's a relationship between your atheism and your Zionism, and that you said, this isn't about God or the Messiah. This is about Jewish people doing the work and fighting the fight to protect ourselves. So, for all the people myself included, you know, who don't identify as religious Jews, but are very committed to Jewish peoplehood in the Jewish community, and Zionism, of course, who really appreciate, you know, how you articulate these issues.
So my Twitter handle says feminist, Zionist, atheist, yes. And indeed, it has these three labels that great. I heard a comedian who once said it was great. She said, when I told my parents that I no longer believe in God, they were mildly disappointed. But why an atheist? So again, it's this notion that once you kind of own the label, you project a kind of confidence that is exactly the problem, because if you project confidence, that it means that your ideas, your revolution, you cannot be easily put down. So this is why I have those three labels. And I definitely insist on the notion that Zionism, and for the modern state of Israel to be born, of course, the Jewish desire for Zion, the connection to the land, to be there, was part of Jewish identity. This is what it meant to be Jewish. There was this connection. It was part of being Jewish. But the political program to establish a modern state, that was a massive revolution. It wasn't just about praying for God and Messiah. It required a rebellion within Jewish life. Jews had to rebel against God and Messiah and basically say, you know what, we're done waiting. These prayers, they're not getting us anywhere. And this is another reason, of course, why Zionism is a modern movement, because it emerges from the modern idea that humans are the agents of change in history, that humans are the ones that can change their collective fate. Now, this is where I come to the intersectional part, because when I'm in my more conspiratorial mindset, I sometimes think that another element that fuels anti-Zionism is the desire to drive a wedge between the success of Zionism and other movements. Because Zionism has been successful, immensely successful, really, you took people who were truly dealt some of the worst card in history. I mean, I think there's little doubt about that. I mean, persecuted and marginalized and discriminated against, and actually went through an industrialized genocide. They pick themselves up. They say no more. They take fate into their own hands. And they reclaim themselves as a collective, as a people, fighting for their freedom, for their liberation, for their self-determination. And they succeed. It's not like some sad story of a rebellion that was put down. So this success is something that people can say, hey, if they did it, why not us? That's a dangerous idea, right? For all these people lower on the power structures, they're going to look at Zionism and say, hey, we can do that too. So sometimes I think that another reason to be that anti-Zionism is powerful and that intersectionalism wants to throw Zionism aside is this idea that we shouldn't give all these people ideas. But my argument was that Zionism is the intersectional idea, because you want people to have these ideas. You want all oppressed, marginalized groups to look at Jews and say, we want what they have. We'll have what they're having. We want that too. So that's really where this is why I think it's again, it's not just about the Jews. It's much broader than that. It is about the fact that human beings can liberate themselves. It is possible. It's exhausting, but it's possible.
Love it. So I was just wondering, and I hope it's okay to ask you this, if you could tell us a little, well, you told us a little bit about your personal story already at the beginning and how, these issues became your life mission. So for people who are still a little shy, as you mentioned, there's definitely people watching, and there are certainly people out there who, maybe know that something is off about being afraid to call themselves Zionists, but they still feel uncomfortable, they still feel shy. What advice would you give them about, being willing to proclaim their commitment for Zionism and feminism?
So I would open up a bit of what's going behind it. I talked about the driving a wedge between the good Jew and the bad Zionist, the good woman and the bad feminist. Sometimes I describe the process, the social pressure that does that, as a kind of a pound of flesh process. I know that in Shylock it was different, but the idea was that Jews are constantly under social pressure to give over a pound of flesh to show that they're the good kind of Jews. You describe the pressure that you face as Zionesses to show your progressive credentials by throwing Israel under the bus. So I call this pressure the pound of flesh process. And the reason that I know it is because I felt it viscerally. I was a very good Jew once. You know, I was a Jew, or I still am, but I was a Jew of the left, an Israeli who supported and still supports a Palestinian state and a two-state solution and opposed the occupation and the settlements. And for a while, that was good enough. By kind of showing that I believed all these things, I was allowed in to the what some people call the community of the good. I was the good kind of Israeli. But then the bar was raised. And even though my opinions remained the same, and they still are, I realized that suddenly it's not enough. And that by now, today, I describe it sometimes as an exorcism ceremony. The bar now to enter into progressive circles is a certain like loud protestation, like you really have to scream out loud, like in an exorcism of like, Zionism out, Zionism evil, get out of me. Like, I'm not that kind of Jew, you know, I'm the good Jew. And I think almost every Jew at one point has this pound of flesh moment where they realize you're never going to stop, right? No matter whatever I give, you're always going to set the bar higher and higher, asking for more. And at one point, I'm like, I think almost every Jew has a moment where they say, I'm done with this. And I had this moment where I was like, look, I still support two states and Palestinians and occupation against the occupation settlements, but I no longer think that this gives me any credit. Like I'm done, and I'm done trying to play to the higher bar to show that I'm the good kind of Jew. I'm not. I'm the bad Zionist, and I'm fine with that. So this is the process. And I think once you expose the process, a lot of people, I think almost viscerally, understand they've gone through being subjected to that kind of pressure. And especially when you're young and on campus, and it's massive pressure that is being brought to you, then you do that. So don't, because they're never going to stop. They're always going to ask for more. And the only way is to just draw a line and say, I'm not going to give you any more pounds of flesh because I realize you're never going to stop.
Yeah, it's everything you're saying is so powerful and so true. And there's, one of the things we talk about a lot with Zionists is that actually the litmus test themselves, the question, when Jews enter progressive spaces and they're asked about Israeli policy, no one who has a relationship with any other foreign country is subjected to those kind of litmus tests. And if they were, we would call them out immediately. I mean, when, Chinese Americans and Asian Americans are being scapegoated for the coronavirus, it's something that we all call out as horrific and despicable. And we stand, in solidarity with Chinese Americans who are facing hate crimes and just so much bigotry and racism because of something that the Chinese government, that people want to blame the Chinese government for. So when Jews are subjected to litmus tests where they're expected to take a position on Israeli policy, to have a position, to take a position, and then, to know enough about it, and then to declare their position to prove that they're the good Jew and not the bad Zionist, the litmus test itself is anti-Semitism. And that, I think, is the relationship between anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism. So, I want people to be able to recognize that they can just reject the litmus test and say, you don't have any right to demand that I take a position on Israeli government policy. And I really want people to understand it's okay if you hate Israeli government policy, you can still be a proud Zionist. And if, in fact, most American Jews are Zionists, I think 94% or something. And I think Frank's polls would probably reflect this, although I'm not sure. Think that Israel is very important to them. It's not, the most immediate urgent need because they're worried about their uteruses, like women, Jewish American women, we care, and Jewish Americans care about all sorts of issues, and Israel is on the list, and it's critically important to us as Jews and as human beings. But you can be a proud Zionist, whether you love Israeli policy or hate Israel in any given, Israeli government, which, seems to change a lot over there. Whether you love Israeli policy or hate it or are ambivalent to it, or frankly, where most people are, know nothing about it. You don't have to follow Middle East politics in order to be a progressive and fight for, the advancement of domestic justice movements here at home, where you vote and where you're a citizen and where you're affected by what's happening, in your country. So I think that's super important. I want to go to your book. We mentioned it at the beginning, The War of Return, how Western indulgence of the Palestinian dream has obstructed the path to peace. I know you wrote this with Adi Schwartz. And I just wanted to ask you, what was the impetus for this book? How has the reception been so far? And what do you think its impact is going to be on the conversation? And congratulations, by the way. I cannot wait to open it this weekend.
Thank you. And it is exciting. And it's been the work of a decade by now. The reason I wrote it, like all the issues that I'm passionate about, is that it's been my life. I grew up in Israel, in the Labor Party, in the peace camp, in left-wing politics. And for when I was a young adult in the 80s and 90s, the politics of the Israeli left, the politics of the Israeli peace camp were very simple. The idea, it was known as a very simple equation. It was called land for peace. And the idea was that all that Israel has to do in order to achieve peace is hand over land, which land, the land that it acquired as a result of the 1967 Six-Day War. And for a while, I mean, this really seemed to work. In return for a peace agreement with Egypt, they got the Sinai Peninsula. And in the 90s, we were negotiating with Syria over the Golan Heights, and we signed a peace agreement with Jordan when it gave up its territorial claims to the West Bank. And we negotiated with the Palestinians over the future of the West Bank and Gaza. And then I lived through two major peace proposals in 2000 and 2008 by Ehud Barak and Ehud Olmert, prime ministers who headed the Israeli peace camp at the time. And they proposed to Palestinians the land, an end to the occupation, no settlements, capital in East Jerusalem. And I lived through Palestinian leaders, Arafat and Abu Mazen, walking away from these proposals and then following it with just this campaign of bloody violence that living in Israel was just horrific. I mean, people were blown to bits for going out to pizza. And like many in the Israeli peace camp, many of us began to ask, what's going on? Why don't we have peace? We were willing to hand over the land. Where's our peace? And the book basically came out of the discussions I started having with Palestinians, the research I conducted. Adi also comes from a similar background. He was a senior journalist at Haaretz, an editor. So he came also from inside the Israeli peace camp to the same experience to ask what's going on. And we both realized that it was hiding in plain sight. It was staring us in the face, and that the Palestinians were telling us what they wanted, but we just didn't listen. They were committed to this thing that they called the right of return, which in the book we show is neither a right nor a return. But it means, in their view, the idea that millions of Palestinians possess a right that breaches Israeli sovereignty to settle inside Israel, thereby transforming Israel into an Arab Palestinian state with a Jewish minority. And we show that this has been consistent. We discussed why we haven't been listening to this. One of the things that I say about this book, that I think one of the book's what one of the things the book does is really restore respect to this conversation by actually listening to what the Palestinians are saying. I have to share with you in terms of the reception. The book, of course, has been well received. We just had a great review of it in the Jerusalem Post, which I love because it's almost a warning sign. The reviewer said, you know, this book, because it's really well researched and it deals with facts, it says might achieve the impossible of actually convincing people to change their minds about the conflict. So it's almost a warning sign, you know, beware, you might read the book and change your mind. But one of the amazing,
because everybody just wants to hold their, you know, be in their echo chamber forever.
Exactly. So one of the amazing reviews we got was by a Palestinian. It came out very early when the book came out about 3 weeks ago. And it was a very angry review. And the reason that he was angry is that he was treating our thesis in the book, that the Palestinians care about this right of return more than they care about it having a state or ending the occupation or fighting settlements. His response was basically, duh, what took you so long? Like, he was angry that we were describing this issue as hiding in plain sight or flying under the radar. Like, so I found it fascinating that the Palestinian reception of the book, and we've seen it also with the Hebrew version, was not one that rejects our thesis, that says, no, what are you talking about? This is just a bargaining chip, or Palestinians don't care about. Like, his response was like, yes, we've been telling you that all along. So sometimes I say, let's have a different definition of what it means to be a progressive. Certainly in this conflict, is let's define a progressive as someone who actually gives people the respect of taking them at their word. And I think this is what the book does in the context of the conflict. It gives the Palestinians the respect of taking them at their word and treating them as agents of history, not this neo-colonial attitude that I think a lot of Westerners have of explaining what Palestinians really mean when they kind of tell you what they're saying. So I think this is why the book does, and this is why, oddly, even though it's, you know, it says a lot of difficult things about the conflict, I think it's progressive in the sense that it actually respects the other side as agents of history who know what they're fighting for. So this is the book. It's been getting, I think, a great reception, some great reviews. And as I said, beware, it might change your mind.
And you could buy it on Amazon. I got it in 2 days on Amazon. And I know that Einat is doing a lot of virtual book tours. Is there anything coming up? And also make sure you're following her on social media so you can, you know, see where else she's speaking. But if there's anything coming up that people should be aware of, I don't know.
I mean, I know there's a lot. We did a lot this week. And also, if you miss any of them, they're on YouTube, and you can just do War of Return, and there's a lot of webinars on YouTube by now.
Okay, great, because I know there's a lot of interest in this book, and I've seen it popping up everywhere. So Mazel Tov on another amazing achievement. This is your 6th book, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so superstar. Okay, I mean, I could talk to you for hours. I know we will keep talking, but thank you. I just want to really thank you from the bottom of my heart for doing this, for everything that you do, for supporting Zioness. It means the world to us. You are really such a leader, and you created an avenue that didn't exist in the way that you were talking, and you were talking for so many people who didn't even realize that they weren't articulating how they felt and where they were. And I know that's, you know, one of the things that inspired me. And now we have all these people who, you know, are feeling seen and heard, and like they have a voice and are represented. So what you've done is incredible. And I know you're, you know, just getting started too.
Thank you. I am in awe of what you do. And really, it's an honor to be here. Thank you.
Thank you. And everyone, please make sure you're following us on social media. Please share our work and our statements, and, you know, hashtag Zioness Speaks for Me. We can amplify the Zionist message. We can, you know, reclaim our identity, and we can reclaim Zionism. We can be feminists. We can be proud feminists, and we have a lot of work to do. So hope you'll join us, join your local chapter, or reach out to us at about@zioness.org if you want to get involved. Someone just wrote, I love you, Dr. Wilf. FYI, the War of Return book does not pop up in Goodreads. I don't know what Goodreads
does not what?
Does not pop up in Goodreads.
Okay, that's odd. I thought they actually wrote something about it, but I'll check.
So check, and you can get it on Amazon.
Yes.
Or like, I mean, I'm sure a lot of other places also, but yes. I got it in 2 days on Amazon. So, okay, so have a wonderful Shavuot, Chag Sameach, and we will talk very soon. I mean, I know you're an atheist, but since
I celebrate Shavuot, I celebrate the Hebrew holidays. They're a part of our culture and history. Let it be clear.
Okay, and thank you all for joining, and we'll see you soon on our next webinar. Take care.